this video, we're going to be going over the all or none principle or phenomenon of an action potential. An action potential either happens completely or it doesn't happen at all. There's no halfway on an action potential. Any stimulus that's going to be strong enough to bring the membrane potential to threshold will generate an action potential. And if threshold isn't reached, no action potential is produced. So for example, when you look at graded potentials, remember, you have neurotransmitter that comes across and it binds to the receptor, opens it, and allows sodium to come in. This sodium is a graded potential at the neuron cell body. It diffuses out, and as it diffuses out, it takes this resting membrane potential at minus 70 millivolts to minus 60 millivolts, which is threshold, which is going to open up a voltage-gated sodium channel. And that right here will be your action potential. You'll have a rapid depolarization, and then the voltage-gated sodium channels will slam shut, and you'll have a repolarization as voltage-gated potassium channels open and bring it back down to, hyperpolarization, and then eventually to the resting membrane potential. This right here is a graded potential. It's not an action potential. Why? Because graded potentials decrease in magnitude along the length of the membrane. It depends on how many sodium channels are open, how much sodium comes in. If it doesn't bring it to threshold, let's say enough sodium comes in that brings it to, say, minus 65 millivolts or minus 62 or 61 millivolts, and it doesn't reach threshold, and you stop stimulating this sodium to come in, well, then the sodium gets pumped back out through the sodium-potassium pumps, and then you don't reach an action potential. So graded potentials aren't an all or none. Action potentials, though, are. Once you hit minus 60 millivolts, this action potential will fire, and sodium will come in. Now, as sodium comes in, it comes in to hit minus 30 millivolts, at which time it slams shut and no more sodium comes in. So that's a set amount. Enough sodium comes in until it hits positive 30 millivolts. So it's set. Graded potential, how much sodium comes in, that can vary. Action potentials, though, are set. They don't decrease in magnitude over distance. It's the same. Sodium in, potassium out. What about a stronger stimulus? What happens if your graded potential is really strong? Does this cause a larger action potential? No. The size of the action potential is always the same because voltage-gated channels slam shut at a particular voltage. In this example that I went over previously, it was voltage-gated sodium channels. They slam shut at positive 30 millivolts, so the size of the action potential doesn't increase with a stronger stimulus. Well, then what happens if you have a stronger stimulus? What does that do to action potentials? Increased stimulus increases the rate of action potentials, but not their size. And the strength of a stimulus is coded by the frequency of action potentials. So a strong stimuli generates a neural impulse, action potentials, more often in a given time interval than do a weak stimuli. For example, if you look at the sensory neurons, when you touch something, say you're touching something that's warm, it will send action potentials at a certain rate to your brain, and your brain picks up those action potentials, but it's picking up the frequency that's coming in to let it know whether it's a strong stimulus or a weak stimulus. For example, if you're touching a warm object, you're going to have action potentials sent in. The frequency of such is going to be relatively slow. That's going to your brain. We're also seeing when we get to the sensory system that it's the number of sensory neurons sending action potentials as well as the frequency. Well, what happens if you touch something really hot? Well, this is going to be a really strong graded depolarization, and the frequency of the action potentials are going to increase. That frequency is going to let your brain know that you're touching something really hot, a stronger stimulus. But the size of the action potential stays the same. It's the frequency of action potentials coming in to the brain that's going to let you know it's a stronger stimulus. Shown here are multiple action potentials. And these little lines represent the action potential. And notice they're all the same height. But if you look at this, here the frequency of the action potential is relatively slow. With a stronger stimulus, they go very, very quickly. Frequency of action potentials increases for stimulus strength. It's an amazing process. Let's test your knowledge. Pause your video and answer the following questions. Here are the answers. And this concludes the video, and let me know if you have any questions on this.